Thing in the Forest by Bernard Capes. Into the snow-locked forest of Upper Hungary still wolves in winter, but there is a footfall worse than theirs to knock upon the heart of the lonely traveler. One December evening, Elspeth, the young, newly-wedded wife of the woodman Stefan, came hurrying over the lower slopes of the White Mountains from the town where she had been all day marketing. She carried a basket with provisions on her arm. Her plump cheeks were like a couple of cold apples. Her breath spoke short, but more from nervousness than exhaustion. It was nearing dusk, and she was glad to see the little lonely church in the hollow below, the hub, as it were, of many radiating paths through the trees, one of which was the road to her own cottage, yet a half-mile away. She paused a moment at the foot of the slope, undecided about entering the little chill, silent building and making her plea for protection to the great battered stone image of Our Lady of Succor, which stood within by the confessional box. But the stillness and growing darkness decided her, and she went on. A spark of fire glowing through the presbytery window seemed to repel rather than attract her, and she was glad when the convolutions of the path hid it from her sight. Being new to the district, she had seen very little of Father Rule as yet, and somehow the penetrating knowledge and burning eyes of the pastor made her feel uncomfortable. The soft drift, the lane of tall, motionless pines, stretched on in a quiet like death. Somewhere the sun, like a dead fire, had fallen into an opalescent embers, faintly luminous. They were enough only to touch the shadows with a ghastlier pallor. It was so still that the light crunch in the snow of the girl's own footfalls trod on her heart like a desecration. Suddenly there was something near her that had not been before. It had come like a shadow, without more sound or warning. It was here, there, behind her. She turned in mortal panic and saw Wolf. With a strangled cry and trembling limbs, she strove to hurry on her way, and always she knew, though there was no whisper of pursuit, that the gliding shadow followed in her wake. Desperate in her terror, she stopped once more and faced it. A wolf! Was it a wolf? Oh, who could doubt it? Yet the wild expression in those famished eyes, so lost, so pitiful, so mingled of insatiable hunger and human need, condemned for its unspeakable sins to take this form with sunset, and so howl and snuffle about the doors of men until the blessed day released it. A werewolf, not a wolf. That terrific realization of the truth smote the girl as with a knife out of darkness. For an instant she came near fainting, and then a low moan broke into her heart and flooded it with pity. So lost, so infinitely hopeless, and so pitiful. Yes, in spite of all, so pitiful. It had sinned beyond any sinning that her innocence knew or her experience could gauge. But she was a woman, very blessed, very happy in her store of comforts and surety of love. She knew that it was forbidden to succor these damned and nameless outcasts, or help or sympathize with them in any way. But there was a good store of meat in her basket, and who need ever know or tell? With shaking hands she found and threw a sop to the desolate brute, then turning, sped upon her way. But at home, her secret sin stood up before her, and interposing between her husband and herself, threw its shadow upon both their faces. What had she dared? What done? By her own act forfeited her birthright of innocence. By her own act placed herself in the power of the evil to which she had ministered. All that night she lay in shame and horror, and all the next day until Stefan had come about his dinner and gone again, she moved in dumb agony. Then, driven unendurably by the memory of his troubled, bewildered face, as twilight threatened, she put on her cloak and went down to the little church in the hollow to confess her sin. "Mother, forgive and save me," she whispered as she passed the statue. After ringing the bell for the confessor, she had not knelt long at the confessional box in the dim chapel, cold and empty as a waiting vault, when the chancel rail clicked and the footfalls of Father Rule were heard rustling over the stones. He came, he took his seat behind the grating, and with many sighs and falterings, Elspeth avowed her guilt, and as, with bowed head, she ended, a strange sound answered her. It was like a little laugh, and yet not so much like a laugh as a snarl. With the shock of death as she raised her face, it was Father Rule who sat there, and yet it was not Father Rule. In that time of twilight, his face already changing, narrowing, becoming wolfish, the eyes rounded and the jaw slavered. She gasped and shrunk back, and at that barking and snapping at the grating, with a wicked look he dropped, and she heard him coming. Sheer horror lent her wings. With a scream she sprang to her feet and fled. Her cloak caught in something. There was a wrench and a crash, like a flood of oblivion overswept her. It was the old, deaf, and near senile sacristan who found them lying there, the woman unhurt but insensible, the priest crushed out of life by the fall of the ancient statue, long tottering to its collapse. She recovered, for her part. For his, no one knows where he lies buried. But there were dark stories of baying pack that night, and of an empty blood-stained pavement when they came to seek for the body. A Voice from the Pit by Bernard Capes. "Signor, we are arrived," whispered the old man in my ear, and he put out a sudden cold hand, corded like melon rind, to stay me in the stumbling darkness. We were on a tilted tableland of the mountain, and, looking forth and below, the fair indigo crescent of the bay, where it swept towards Castellamare, seemed to rise up at me as if it were a perpendicular wall, across which the white crest of the waves flew like ghost moths. We skirted a boulder and came upon a field of sleek purple lava, sown all over with little lemon jets of silent smoke, which in their wan and melancholy glow might have been the corpse lights of those innumerable dead whose tombstone was the mountain itself. Far away to the right, the great projecting socket of the crater flickered intermittently with a nerve of fire. It was like the glinting of the watchful eye of some vast crustacean, and in that harsh and stupendous desolation seemed the final crown and expression of utter inhumanity. I started upon hearing the low whisper of my companion in my ear. "In the bay yesterday, the signor saved my life. I give the signor, in return, my life's secret." He seized my right hand in his left with a sinewy clutch and pointed a stiff finger at the luminous blots. "See there, and there, and there," he shrilled. "One floats and wavers like a spineless ribbon of seaweed in the water. Another burns with a steady radiance. A third blares from its fissure like a flame driven by the blowpipe. It is all a question of the underdraft, and some may feel it a little, and some a little more or a little less. Ah, but I will show you the one that feels it not at all. A hole, a narrow shaft that goes straight down into the pit of the great hell, and is cold as the mouth of a barbel." The bones of his face stood out like rocks against sand, and the pupils of his maniac eyes were glazed or fell into shadow as the volcano lightnings fluttered. Suddenly, he drew me to a broken pile of sulfur rock lying tumbled against a ridge of the mountain that ran towards the crater. It lay heaped, a fused and fantastic ruin, and in a moment the old man leapt from me, and was tugging by main strength a vast fragment from its base. I leaned over his shoulder and looked down upon the hollow revealed by the displaced boulder. It was like the bell of a mighty trumpet, and in the middle of a puckered opening seemed to suck inwards, as it were the mouth of some subterranean monster risen to the surface of the world for air. "Quick, quick," muttered Paolo. "The signor must place his ear to the hole." With a little odd stir at my heart, I dropped upon my knees and leaned my head deep into the cup. I must have stayed thus for a full minute before I drew myself back and looked up at the old mountaineer. His eyes gazed down into mine with mad intensity. "See, see," he whispered, "what didst thou hear?" I heard a long surging thunder, Paolo, and the deep shrill screams of many gas jets. He bent down with a livid face. "Signor, it is the booming of the everlasting fire, and thou hast heard the voices of the damned." "No, my friend, no, but it is a marvelous transmission of the uproar of hidden forces." He leapt into the shallow pit. "Listen and believe," he cried, and funneling his hands about his lips, he stooped over the central hole. "Marco! Marco!" he screamed in a piercing voice. Something answered back. What was it? A malformed and twisted echo? A whistle of imprisoned stream trickled into some horrible caricature of a human voice? "Paolo!" it seemed to wail, weak and faint with agony. "Larca, Larca, Paolo!" The old man sprang to his feet, and looking down upon me in some sort of terrible triumph, unslung a water flask from his belt, and pulling out the cork, poured the cold liquid down into the puckered orifice. Then I felt his clutch on my arm again. "He drinks," he cried. "Listen, and thou wilt understand." I rose with the ghost of a laugh, and once more addressed my ear to the opening. From unthinkable depths came a strange gloating sound, as from a ravenous throat made vibrant with ecstasy. "Paolo!" I cried as I rose and stood before him, and there was an admonitory note in my voice. A feather may decide the balance. Beware meddling with hidden thunders, or thou mayst set rolling such another tombstone as that on which these corpse fires are yet flaming. And he only answered me, set in deathly, We of the mountains, Signor, know more things than we may tell of.
The Vanishing House by Bernard Capes. My grandfather, said the banjo, drank dog's nose. My father drank dog's nose, and I drink dog's nose. If that ain't heredity, there's no virtue in the board schools. Ah, said the piccolo, you're always the boasting of your science, and so, I suppose, your son'll drink dog's nose too? No, retorted the banjo, with a rumbling laugh like wind in the bunghole of an empty cask, for I ain't got none. The family ends with me, which is a pity, for I'm a full stop to be proud on. He was an enormous, ton-bellied person, a mere mound of expressionless flesh, whose size alone was an investment that paid a perpetual dividend of laughter. When, as with the rest of his company, his face was blackened, it looked like a specimen coal on a pedestal in a museum. There was a Christmas company in the Good Intent, and the sanded tap room with its trestle tables and sprigs of holly stuck under sooty beams reeked with smoke and the steam of hot gin and water. How much could you put down a night, Jack? Said a little grinning man by the door. Why, said the banjo, enough to lay the dustiest ghost as ever walked. Could you now, said the little man. Ah, said the banjo, chuckling, there's nothing like setting one spirit to lay another, and there I could give you proof number 2 of heredity. What? Don't you go for to say you ain't ever seen a ghost? Haven't I? What are you whispering about, you blushful chap there by the winder? I was only remarking, sir, 'twere snawing like the devil. Is it? Then the devil has been misjudged these 1890-odd years. But did you ever see a ghost? Said the little grinning man, pursuing his subject. No, sir. No, I didn't, sir, mimicked the banjo, saving in the coffee grounds with my grandfather and his cup seed one, which brings us to number 3 in the matter of heredity. Give us the story, Jack, said the bones, whose acute shins were extemporizing a rattle on their own account before the fire. Well, I don't mind, said the fat man. It's seasonable, and I'm a seasonable man, like the blessed plum pudding I am. And the more burnt brandy you set about me, the richer and headier I'll go down. You'd be a jolly old pudding to digest, said the piccolo. You blow your aguation into the pipe, and the sealing wax stops, said his friend. He drew critically at his churchwarden a moment or so, leaned forward, empties his glass into the capacious receptacles, and gives his stomach a shift as if to accommodate it to its new burden. Proceeded as follows. Music and malt is my national inheritance. My grandfather blew his dog's nose and drank his clarinet like an artist, and my father... What did you say your grandfather did? Asked the piccolo. He played the clarinet. You said he blew his dog's nose. Don't be an ass, Fred, said the banjo, aggrieved. How the blazes could a man blow his dog's nose unless he muzzled it with a handkerchief and twisted its tail? He played the clarinet, I say, and my father played the musical glasses, which was a form of harmony genial to him. Amongst us we've piped out a good long century. Ah, we have. For all I look such a baby, bursting on sops and spoon meat. What, said the little man by the door? You don't include them cocked hatses in your experience? My grandfather wore them, sir. He wore a play-acting coat, too, and buckles to his shoes, where he'd got any, and he had a friend or two make permanency of weights, only they called them according to the season, and got their profit going from house to house, principally in the country, and discourse and music at the low rate of whatever they could get it for. Ain't you come to the ghost, Jack? Said the little man hungrily. All in course, sir. Well, gentlemen, it was hard times pretty often with my grandfather and his friends, as you may suppose, and never so much as when they had to trudge it cross-country, with the nor'easter buzzing in their teeth, and the snow piled on their cocked hats like lemon sponges in entry dishes. The rewards, I've heard him say, for he lived to be 90 nevertheless, was poor compensation for the drifts, and the influenza, and the broken chilblains, and now and again they get a fair skinful of liquor from a jolly squire, as set 'em up for boggarts mended with new broomsticks. Ho-ha, broke in a hurdle maker in a corner, and then, regretting the publicity of his merriment, put his fingers bashfully to his stubble lips. Now, said the banjo, if it's a particular night and a particular skinful, then I'm going to tell you. And that night fell dark, and the skinful were took 100 years ago this December, as I'm Jack Puddin'. He paused a moment for effect before he went on. They were down in the southwest country, which they little knew, and were a nigh in Winchester City, or I should have been. But they got muzzled on the ungodly downs, and before they guessed, they was off the track. My good hat, there they was, as lost in the snow as 3 nutshells sinking into a hasty pudding. Well, they wandered around pretty confident at first, but getting madder and madder as every sense of their bearings slipped from them, and the bitter cold took their vitals, so as they saw nothing but a great winding sheet stretched abroad to wrap their dead carcasses in. At last my grandfather, he stopped and pulled himself together with an awful face and says, "We're Christmas pie for the carrying on crows if we don't prove ourselves human. Let's fetch our pipes and blow out our trouble into 'em." So they stood together, like as if they was before a house, and they played Kate of Aberdare, mighty dismal and flat, for their fingers froze to the keys. Now I tell you, they hadn't climbed over the first stave when there came a skirl of wind and a spindrift of snow as almost took 'em off their feet, and on the going down of it, Jem Sloke, as played the hot boy, dropped the reed from his mouth and called out, "Sakes alive, if we fools ain't been standing outside a gentleman's gate all the time and not knowing it." You might have knocked 3 of 'em down with barley straw as they stared and fell into a low, enjoying laugh. For they was standing not 6 foot from a tall iron gate in a stone wall, and behind these was a great house showing, out dim with the windows all lighted up. "Lord," chuckled my grandfather, "to think of the tricks of beggar's country. But as we're here, we'll go on and give 'em a taste of our quality." They put new heart into the next movement, as you may guess, and they hadn't fair started on it when the door of the house swung open, and down the shaft of light that shot out as far as the gate, there come a smiling young gal with a tray of glasses in her hands. Now she come to the bars, and she took and put a glass through, not saying nothing, but inviting someone to drink with a silent laugh. Did anyone take the glass? Of course he did, you'll be thinking, and you'll be thinking wrong. Not a man of the 3 moved. They was stuck like stone, and their lips was gone the color of slow berries. Not a man took the glass, for why? The moment the gal presented it, each saw the face of a thing looking out of the window over the porch, and the face was hideous beyond words, and the shadow of it, and the light behind stretched out and reached to the gal and made her hideous too. At last my grandfather gave a groan and put out his hand as he did. The face went, and the gal was beautiful to be seen again. "Death of the devil," said he. "It's one or both. Either way, I prefer him not to cold." He drank off half the glass, smacked his lips, and stood staring a moment. "Dear, dear," said the gal in a voice like falling water, "you've drunk blood, sir." My grandfather gave a yell, slapped the rest of the liquor in the faces of his friends, and threw the cup against the bars. It broke with a noise like thunder, and at that, he up with his hands, fell full length into the snow. There was a pause. The little man by the door was twisting nervously in his chair. "He came to, of course. He came to?" said he at length. "He come to," said the banjo solemnly, "in the bitter break of dawn, that is. He come to as much as himself as ever was." He gave a squiggle, lifted his head, and there was he and his friends a-lying on the snow of the high downs. And the house and the gal? Nary a sign of either, sir, but just the sky and the white stretch, and one other thing. And what was that? A stain of red sunk in where the cup had spilt. There was a second pause, and the banjo blew into his bowl of pipe. "They cleared out of that neighborhood double quick, you'll bet," said he. But my grandfather was never the same man again. His face took purple, while his friends only remained splashed with red, same as birthmarks. And I tell you, if he ever ventured upon Kate Aberdare, his cheeks swelled up to the red of his clarinet, like as a blue plum on a stalk, and 40 years after, he died of what they call solution of blood to the brain. "And you can't have better proof than that," said the little man. "That's what I say," said the banjo. "Next player, gentlemen, please."